Processing grief without getting stuck. Naming the emotions of divorce. Understanding grief. Acknowledge and validate your loss. Identifying the layers of grief. When your neighbor asked how you were doing weeks after you filed, you said fine because you didn't have language for what was actually happening. You weren't sad in the way people expect. No sobbing over old photos or sentimental playlist marathons. You were grieving something stranger and more diffuse. The sensation of forward motion itself. Divorce grief operates on multiple frequencies simultaneously, and most people recognize only one or two channels. The obvious losses get acknowledged. Friends bring wine when you're mourning the end of companionship or the family unit you thought you'd built. But grief extends into territories that feel too abstract to name, often manifesting as disenfranchised grief, a term coined by researcher Kenneth Doka to describe losses that society does not openly validate. Doka, 1989. This includes the identity you'd constructed around being someone's spouse and the daily rhythms that gave structure to your weeks. These layers don't arrive sequentially. You might feel intense relief about ending a difficult relationship while simultaneously experiencing what therapist Pauline Boss defines as ambiguous loss, where a partner remains physically alive but psychologically absent from your life. Boss, 1999. This ambiguity colors the loss of in-laws who became your family, or the shared dream of retiring in Portugal that now belongs to neither of you. Some mornings, the sharpest pain comes from realizing you'll never again be the person who planned that particular future, regardless of whether you still wanted it. Naming these dimensions matters, because unacknowledged grief doesn't disappear. It just gets coded as restlessness, insomnia, or inexplicable irritation at checkout lines. When you can finally articulate, "I'm grieving the Tuesday night ritual we had," or "I'm mourning the version of myself who believed in permanence," you create space for actual processing instead of vague, persistent discomfort. Validating your emotional experience. Self-validation might sound like another therapy buzzword, but it's actually the opposite of what most of us learned growing up. If you were raised to stay strong, get over it, or not dwell on things, the idea of deliberately validating your own pain probably feels indulgent. It's not. It's survival. When you validate your emotions, you're telling yourself that what you feel is real, understandable, and worthy of acknowledgement. You're not saying the emotion is right or wrong, productive or destructive. You're simply saying it exists, and it makes sense given what you've been through. This is radically different from wallowing in your feelings or using them as an excuse to stay stuck. Self-validation is the bridge between denial and obsession, the middle path that lets you feel without drowning. Leinen, 1993. Think of it like this. If a friend came to you crying about their divorce, you wouldn't tell them to snap out of it or criticize them for being upset. You'd sit with them. You'd say, "Of course you're heartbroken. You built a life with this person." That's validation. Now imagine offering yourself that same grace. Non-judgmental acknowledgement creates the conditions for movement. When you stop fighting your emotions or labeling them as weak, pathetic, or inappropriate, they lose their power to control you. Acceptance and commitment therapy. Pioneer Stephen Hayes describes this distinction as clean pain, the natural, inevitable grief of loss, versus dirty pain, the extra suffering we generate by resisting or criticizing our feelings. Hayes and Smith, 2005. Divorce brings enough clean pain on its own. Don't pile on the dirty kind by beating yourself up for having a human response to heartbreak. Self-validation doesn't mean you have to like how you feel. It just means you stop treating your emotions like inconvenient problems that need to be fixed immediately. They're not problems. They're information. And when you learn to listen without judgment, you start to understand what you actually need to heal. Schwartz and Clore, 1983. Moving through grief. Constructively. Grief from divorce doesn't just hurt because you lost a relationship. It hurts because the stakes are so much higher than most people acknowledge. You're not grieving one thing. You're grieving the future you planned, the identity you built around being married, the daily routines that shaped your sense of normalcy, and sometimes the person you thought you were. When researchers study major life stressors, divorce consistently ranks in the top 2 of all adult life stressors, second only to the death of a spouse. Holmes and Ray, 1967. That's not hyperbole. That's your nervous system telling you something monumental has shifted. What makes divorce grief particularly treacherous is its invisibility. There's no funeral, no formal mourning period, no casseroles showing up at your door. People expect you to bounce back quickly, to move on as if you're simply switching jobs or cities. But your body knows better. Your mind knows better. The grief shows up in unexpected waves, triggered by a song, a familiar restaurant, the empty side of the bed. Journaling is one of the most underrated tools for processing this kind of loss. Not the neat, pretty kind of journaling where you craft perfect sentences. I'm talking about raw, messy brain dumps, where you let everything spill onto the page without judgment. Write about what you miss. Write about what you don't miss. Write about the person you were when you got married and the person you're becoming now. The act of naming your emotions on paper, a process psychologists refer to as affect labeling, Lieberman et al. 2007, gives them shape, makes them manageable instead of this overwhelming fog you're walking through. Seeking support isn't weakness. It's strategic emotional management. Whether that's a therapist who specializes in divorce recovery, a support group full of people who actually get it, or a trusted friend who can sit with you without trying to fix everything. Isolation is your enemy right now. You need witnesses to your pain, people who can reflect back that what you're feeling makes complete sense given what you've been through. Kremrei et al., 2007. And here's the part nobody wants to hear. You have to embrace the change, not just endure it. That doesn't mean you're grateful for the divorce or pretending everything's fine. It means you stop fighting against the reality that your life has fundamentally shifted. You stop waiting for things to go back to how they were. You start asking different questions, not how do I get back to normal, but what does normal look like now? This shift in perspective is where resilience begins. It's the moment you stop being a victim of your circumstances and start being the architect of what comes next. Unraveling anger, letting go of resentment, understanding the roots of anger. Anger after divorce doesn't arrive cleanly labeled. It masquerades as frustration at your lawyer's slow email responses, irritation when your neighbor asks how you're doing, or rage at minor traffic delays. Most people think they're angry about the divorce itself, the betrayal, the broken promises, the wasted years. That's rarely the whole story. Beneath surface anger sits something more fundamental: powerlessness. You didn't choose the timing, you couldn't control the outcome, and you can't force someone to remain committed. Even in divorces you initiated, there's anger at circumstances that made leaving necessary. That fury about your ex's new relationship, it's often less about jealousy than about the stark reminder that you control nothing about their choices anymore. Anger also guards against vulnerability. Rage feels stronger than sadness, more dignified than admitting you miss someone who hurt you. Psychological frameworks like the anger iceberg show that outward fury is often just a protective tip masking submerged grief, shame, and fear. Benson, 2016. While feeling furious feels safer than feeling broken, this shield keeps you tethered to exactly what you're trying to escape. Common triggers reveal these underlying wounds. If you're enraged about dividing possessions, you might actually be grieving the loss of shared history those objects represent. Fury about custody arrangements often masks terror about losing daily connection with your children. Financial resentment runs deep because money represents security, autonomy, and fairness. All things divorce destabilizes. Anger isn't your enemy. It's a messenger signaling what matters to you. Someone indifferent wouldn't feel rage. Your anger points toward unmet needs, respect, acknowledgement, justice, or simply being heard. Understanding its source doesn't make fury disappear overnight, but it transforms blind reaction into something you can eventually work with. Until you know what's actually fueling your anger, you're just spinning. Transforming anger into constructive action. Anger stops being useful when it becomes your default setting, when it's the only emotion you allow yourself to feel. It becomes constructive when you treat it like the diagnostic tool it actually is. What boundary was violated? What value was trampled? What do you need that you're not getting? Those questions don't eliminate fury, but they give it direction. They turn corrosive resentment into clarity about what you're actually fighting for. One of the most effective ways to channel anger is through assertive communication. This doesn't mean venting every frustration or launching into a tirade about your ex's shortcomings. It means learning to express what you feel without apology, but also without weaponizing your words. "I'm angry because I feel disrespected" carries more weight than a string of accusations. It keeps the focus on your experience rather than spiraling into blame. Tangney et al., 1996. Creative outlets offer another powerful path. Some people write letters they never send. Others paint, run, or smash old dishes in the garage. The medium doesn't matter. What matters is giving your anger a physical form, a way out of your body that doesn't involve destruction of what you're trying to rebuild. Here's the shift that changes everything. Anger can fuel change instead of feeding bitterness. When you feel that familiar heat rising, ask yourself what it's protecting. Often, anger is a bodyguard for hurt, fear, or disappointment. Greenberg, 2015. It steps forward when something softer feels too vulnerable to expose. Recognizing that doesn't invalidate the anger, it deepens your understanding of it. This process isn't about forcing yourself to get over it or pretending you're fine. It's about refusing to let resentment become your permanent address. You can acknowledge that you were wronged, that you have every right to be furious, and still choose not to carry that fury into every room of your new life. Dismantling resentment means deciding that your peace matters more than your ex's punishment. It means recognizing that holding on to anger doesn't hurt them. It anchors you to a past you're trying to leave behind. When you reframe anger as information rather than identity, you reclaim the energy you've been pouring into old battles and redirect it toward building something worth your attention. Practicing forgiveness to release resentment. Forgiveness doesn't mean absolving someone of responsibility. It doesn't require reconciliation, forced compassion, or pretending the harm never happened. What it does require is deciding that you're no longer willing to let someone else's actions dictate the quality of your present life. Start with what forgiveness isn't. It's not about your ex deserving it. It's not conditional on an apology, remorse, or changed behavior. Waiting for those things keeps you tethered to someone who may never provide them. Forgiveness is fundamentally selfish in the best possible way. It's about freeing yourself from the exhausting work of carrying resentment. Think of resentment as a weight you've been hauling around, a heavy backpack you forget you're even wearing until your shoulders start to ache. Every time you replay that argument, rehash that betrayal, or mentally catalog your ex's failures, you're adding another stone to the load. Forgiveness is the moment you decide to set the backpack down, not because the person who hurt you earned that relief, but because you're tired of being weighed down by something that no longer serves you. Here's a practical entry point, drawing on the clinical benefits of expressive writing. Pennebaker, 1997. Write down the specific grievances you're still holding. Don't edit yourself or worry about being fair. Just get it all out on paper, as writing about difficult emotional events has been shown to help individuals process and eventually release interpersonal grievances. McCullough et al., 2006. Then ask yourself a simple question for each one. What would my life look like if I stopped carrying this? The answer might surprise you. You might realize that the anger you've been nursing has become a strange kind of companion, familiar and almost comforting in its reliability. Letting it go can feel like losing something, even when that something has been hurting you. Forgiveness is a practice, not a single decision, representing a process that often transitions from a cognitive commitment to a deeper emotional shift. Worthington et al., 2007. Some days you'll feel lighter, freer, genuinely at peace. Other days the old anger will resurface, sharp and insistent, demanding your attention. That's normal. Progress isn't linear, and releasing resentment takes time. The key is to keep choosing release over retention, peace over punishment, even when it feels unnatural. This is a gift you give yourself, not them. And every time you choose it, you reclaim a little more of your emotional freedom. Identity confusion and guilt. Navigating complex emotions. Understanding identity loss. Start with what you know. Take a blank sheet of paper and draw a vertical line down the middle. On the left, list every role or identity marker that involved your spouse, someone's wife, his travel companion, host of Sunday dinners for his family, co-owner of that lake house, the couple who always sat in the back row at church. Don't edit or judge, just inventory what's changed. On the right side, list what remains or what's emerging. Not aspirations or what you think should be there. Actual facts about who you are right now, today, independent of that relationship. Many people find the left column fills quickly while the right side stays frustratingly sparse. That imbalance isn't a character flaw. It's data. When you shared a life with someone for years, certain parts of your identity became joint ventures, a cognitive overlapping known as including the other in the self, Aaron et al., 1992. You weren't just you anymore. You were half of a unit, a team, a partnership that shaped how you moved through the world. Divorce doesn't just end a relationship. It dissolves an entire ecosystem of shared routines, roles, and rituals. The loss feels so destabilizing because you're not just grieving a person. You're mourning a version of yourself that no longer has a context to exist in, which can cause a sudden decline in self-concept clarity. Slaughter et al. 2010. This confusion is normal. You're standing in the gap between who you were and who you're becoming, and that space feels uncomfortably empty. But recognizing that discomfort as a natural part of transition, not a sign that something's wrong with you, is the first step toward reclaiming your sense of self. You haven't lost yourself. You're simply rediscovering which parts were authentically yours all along. Confronting guilt and shame. Guilt and shame don't arrive announced. They creep in sideways, through offhand comments from your mother-in-law, the way your kid's teacher pauses when updating emergency contact forms, the quiet judgment you imagine on every face at school pickup. As research professor Dr. Brené Brown famously distinguishes, guilt is a focus on behavior, while shame is a focus on self. Guilt says you did something wrong. Shame says you are something wrong. Brown, 2012. Both thrive in the space between what you thought your life would be and what it actually became. Divorce guilt often has multiple sources. There's the obvious layer: breaking promises, disrupting your children's stability, disappointing parents who believed marriage was forever. Then there's the subtler stuff. Feeling like you should have tried harder, stayed longer, been more forgiving. Maybe you replay that last argument on loop, convinced that if you'd just said something differently, everything would have worked out. This kind of guilt is exhausting because it keeps you tethered to a past you can't change, whispering that you personally ruined everything. Shame operates differently. It's the voice that tells you you're fundamentally flawed, that only broken people get divorced, that you'll never get relationships right. Shame doesn't just criticize your decisions, it attacks your worth. It convinces you that your divorce proves something unchangeable about who you are as a person. The first step in navigating these emotions is simply naming them. When you feel that familiar stomach drop of self-condemnation, pause and ask, is this guilt about something I did, or shame about who I think I am? Guilt can be productive if it leads to genuine accountability and change. Shame never is. It just keeps you stuck in a cycle of self-punishment that prevents actual growth. Practicing self-compassion means treating yourself the way you'd treat a close friend going through the same situation. Neff, 2011. You wouldn't tell them they're irreparably damaged or worthless because their marriage ended. You'd acknowledge their pain, validate their effort, and remind them that one chapter doesn't define the whole story. Give yourself that same grace. Rebuilding self-perception. Rebuilding identity after divorce isn't about discovering a completely new person. It's about recognizing the parts of yourself that existed before the marriage, got buried during it, and are now demanding attention. That version of you who made decisions without constant negotiation, who had preferences that didn't require compromise, who existed independently, they didn't disappear. They just got quiet. The confusion comes from how thoroughly relationships reshape self-perception. Research by Erica B. Slaughter, Wendy L. Gardner, and Eli J. Finkel, 2010, shows that romantic separation significantly diminishes what psychologists call self-concept clarity, our subjective sense of knowing who we are. Slaughter et al., 2010. After years of being part of a unit, individual preferences blur. You might genuinely not know if you like Thai food or if that was always your ex's choice. Whether you're naturally introverted or simply retreated because conflict felt inevitable. These aren't trivial questions. They're the foundation of knowing who you actually are. Start with what's undeniably true about you now, not who you were at 20 or who you hope to become. What pisses you off? What makes you laugh when you're alone? What would you do on a Saturday with zero obligations and no one to please? These answers reveal values more clearly than abstract self-reflection exercises. They cut through the theoretical noise and land on actual preferences, the kind that shape daily choices and long-term satisfaction. Your strengths haven't vanished either, even if they feel inaccessible. The resilience that got you through separation negotiations, the patience required to co-parent despite tension, the courage to choose uncertainty over misery. These aren't minor accomplishments. They're evidence of capacity you'll use again. Write them down. Not for motivation, but for accuracy. You've already survived what once seemed impossible. This reconstruction takes longer than you'd prefer. Some days you'll feel clear about your identity. Other days you'll panic that you're performing a version of yourself rather than genuinely being anyone. That instability is normal during transitions. Your nervous system is recalibrating what safety feels like when it's not contingent on another person's approval. The goal isn't reaching some fixed, perfected identity. It's becoming comfortable with the ongoing process of self-definition, making choices because they align with your values, not because they maintain peace or meet external expectations. That shift from reactive to intentional living doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen. And when it does, you'll recognize yourself again, not as who you were, but as who you're becoming.